Hello, welcome to the December 2022 Interprofessional Global Cafe. Today's topic is updates from IPEC, their commitment to methodological rigor and inclusivity in research and core competencies revision. My name is Tony Breitbach. I am a faculty member at St. Louis University. I am the ASAP representative on the IPEC Core Competencies Revision Working Group, and I'm also the communications co-chair for Interprofessional Global. Talk to you about today's agenda. We're going to start to give some background on the IPEC and the core competencies. We're going to discuss the IPEC Scoping Review Project. We are going to move from there to the IPEC Institutional Assessment Instrument, and then we're going to move into talking about the core competencies revision, and then there'll be a discussion of Q&A and next steps moving forward. Our objectives are to describe the background and history of IPEC and the core competencies, share critical information around current IPEC projects, and gather comments, reactions, and questions and guidance for IPEC's key initiatives. I would ask you to please stay muted if possible. If you do have questions, put those into the chat and we will tee those up for the Q&A session at the end. So I'm going to start off by introducing our first speaker, Shelley McCarney. She's the Associate Director at IPEC, and she will begin our presentation.
Thanks so much, Tony, and thank you to our colleagues at IP Global for having us today. I'll quickly go over again the background and history of IPEC and the core competencies if you aren't familiar. To start off, I'd like to show this great quote, and although it's over a decade old, it's still very relevant to today's healthcare landscape. You know, essentially saying that a shift to team-based care, that model must first take place in education before it can really take a hold in practice. You know, after graduation, most of our students are thrown into environments where they're expected to function as part of a team. And it's very important that we equip them for this reality before they step foot into practice. So really inspired by this vision of team-based care, 6 national education associations formed a collaborative to advance interprofessional learning experiences. And they began meeting together as early as 2009. And so that photo on the left was actually taken in May 2011 at the National Press Club in DC. It was there that IPEC announced these new core competencies for IPE, as well as action strategies to implement them. So together they wanted not only to share this common vision of team-based care, but they also wanted to encourage healthcare reform and help develop interprofessional learning tools. So IPEC really believes that these new models should emphasize, again, team care in both the classroom and in practice. And, you know, in the aftermath of the pandemic, it's been glaringly evident that we really need to look at new models for delivering better care. So IPEC envisions a future where improved health care and population health outcomes are really driven by this collaborative practice. And although our mission statement has changed slightly over the years, IPEC's mission has pretty much remained steadfast in its focus to help prepare students for team-based care. So you may be asking again, what is IPEC? IPEC, again, is a consortium of these associations that you see on the screen committed to advancing the same goal, advancing IPE. So what really began as a partnership of 6 organizations has really grown to represent 21 member associations. And our members come from a variety of disciplines, as you can see here represented on the screen, and really with such a diverse set of associations working together, it's our hope that our vision becomes more and more of a reality. To accomplish its goals, we offer a wide variety of programming, but I'll only highlight our flagship program, which is the IPEC Faculty Development Institute. The institutes bring together teams and individual champions together. You know, at the end of the program, they leave with an action plan to either build or enhance IPE at their home institution. And since 2012, we've hosted over 2,200 participants from all 50 states in the United States and actually around the globe. We've hosted international teams from Lebanon, Canada, and actually South Africa as well. And on that note, I'd like to quickly plug in our next institute, which actually is going to be held virtually in May of next year on the 23rd to the 25th. It's open to members and non-members, and you can take a look at the agenda and the confirmed speakers online. Early bird pricing ends next month, actually on January 31st. So I'd like to now switch gears and talk a little bit about IPEC's biggest contribution, the report, Core Competencies for Interprofessional Collaborative Practice. The report was released back in 2011 and developed by a consensus panel. That panel proposed 4 domains of core competencies that were really needed to provide integrated, high-quality care to patients. It also identified 38 specific subcompetencies that describe essential behaviors across those 4 domains. And those domains are values and ethics, roles and responsibilities, interprofessional communication, and teams and teamwork. So these core competencies have been widely used in the United States and across the globe. In fact, in a recent publication from our friends at IPE Global, they had conducted an up-to-date global environmental scan of IPE. And in that global IPE situational analysis results, that final report, I believe it's question 11B, it actually indicated that the core competencies are the most utilized interprofessional competency framework worldwide. And later on, my colleagues will kind of go a little bit more in depth into the current revision process of those important competencies. Thanks, Tony.
Yes, and now we're going to turn it over to Tamara Cadet, and she is going to present the results of our scoping review of the literature.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Tamara Cadet. I'm delighted to be here to talk about the scoping review. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I'm one of the co-authors of the scoping review and the Council on Social Work Education representative for the Core Competency Working Group. So essentially what we were trying to do is get a sense of what was going on around IPE and patient outcomes. And so really it was about evaluating this evidence, linking IPE and interventions that improve the delivery of safe and effective patient care. And so IPEC partnered with the Association of Academic Health Sciences Library to develop a protocol and START. And our goal really was to produce at least 1 scholarly publication, which I'm happy to inform you that we will be submitting for publication later this week. Next slide. So what was the research question? We really wanted to know, has the inclusion of IPE in healthcare curricula had a direct impact on quality of patient care? So really we were looking for at least 2 different healthcare professionals who participated in a training or who experienced IPE, and it included at least, and it had included at least one of the 10 Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services quality measures that I'll talk about shortly. Next slide. What is remarkable about this scoping review more than the results is that each of us represented a different area and worked really well together. This was not possible with everybody that was on the screen. And I learned a lot about different disciplines. So typical of a scoping review, there were several databases that we searched. We were looking only from 2015 to 2021. So Cochrane, PubMed, Scopus, and ERIC were among those. Next slide. So the quality measures, there are a number of quality measures, but these were the ones that came up as we were sort of doing our review: length of stay, medical errors, patient satisfaction, patient or caregiver education, and mortality. And these are part of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services quality measures. So what's most exciting is that there was a positive impact. And so most of the studies, and so this was a scoping review, was more descriptive. And so these are sort of descriptive outcomes, but sort of what we found was that 67 of the studies reported a decreased length of stay for patients. 77 reported a decrease in medical errors. 95% reported an increase in patient satisfaction. 95% reported an increase in patient or caregiver education, and 50% reported a decrease in mortality. And yes, these were limited to US sites. I saw that in the chat. We did US sites only. And so what did we learn and what did we in addition to sort of those positive results, what we learned is that it really was professionals and there wasn't students really involved, and students are underrepresented as a whole. And if we're trying to get students when they're learning to sort of do this work later, we've got to do a better job. And I can talk about that shortly at the end. But really, you know, when we looked at length of stay, medical errors, and mortality, it really was like over 90% of just professionals being involved. Although with patient satisfaction and patient and caregiver education, it was evenly split for the most part. Next slide. So what do we learn about sort of disciplines? Medicine and nursing were highly represented in the 80s, and then pharmacy and social work followed by some of the other more underrepresented disciplines. And so really, in addition to sort of our ability to sort of think about working with students more in this work, we really need to think about opportunities to better understand the IPE collaborations around those professionals that weren't necessarily included in the scoping review, but are doing really important work. So some of our limitations, we did not examine articles that may have had an indirect impact on patients. So any articles that were solely focused on caregiving, for instance, weren't included. We didn't look at cost or the feasibility of the interventions. We didn't assess whether there was reproducibility or the quality of the studies, and we could not we tried, but we could not categorize the IP interventions as they were just so different. Each one was different in different ways. And so what are our recommendations that you'll see in the paper, fingers crossed it gets published soon, is that for folks who are thinking about research in this area, people should be thinking about standardized reproducible interventions that can be generalized to outside institutions to match them to specific patient outcomes. So if you're thinking about a specific patient outcome, is there a standardized intervention that can be used that other people can reproduce? I think it's crucial that we think about including students, as I talked about before, underrepresented disciplines. We're going to have medicine and nursing for sure, but there's so many others that are doing really good work that we need to know. And then really importantly, these research efforts need to be sort of thinking about the specific number and the specific roles. So many of them said, well, medicine, nursing, pharmacy, and social work did this, but we don't know quite what they did. So that specificity is going to be important. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Appreciate you and the group's good work. Now we'll be turning it over to Joe Zorek to talk about the initiative regarding the development of the institutional assessment instrument.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you to Interprofessional.global for the opportunity to share our work. I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and also Kelly Ragucci, who had a conflict arise and sends her regrets for not being able to attend today. Our project was funded by the Josiah Macy Foundation with a direct partnership with IPEC and lots of different collaborators who I'll be able to introduce shortly. Next slide, please. The overall goal, going back many years, the IPEC Board of Directors was monitoring the state of the field, in particular around assessment and measurement, and sort of highlighted this idea that there were not many valid, reliable, psychometrically sound instruments that specifically were developed to measure the institutional characteristics associated to successful implementation of IPE. And that really became the genesis of this project. And our overall goal was to see if we could, working with a large interprofessional group with impact from input from a large group of stakeholders, develop a tool that was psychometrically sound to achieve that goal. Next slide. Our expert panel, I don't have the opportunity due to our time to thank and highlight each and every one of the individuals who were chosen through a competitive selection process with a focus across the US. This was our project was focused on US institutions and IPE within that context. But on the call, I did notice, and sorry if anyone's joined late since I took the notes, Amy Blue, Heather Hageman, Andrea Peifel, and are all on this. We're all part of our expert panel and are here today, and they're welcome to jump in and answer any questions from their perspective later. But then also we formed a national advisory committee that was made up of individuals working in the IPE space who had a longstanding experience with instrument development. And Kelly Lockman from Virginia Commonwealth is on the call, and she was part of our advisory committee as well. Next slide. So what you can see here is that our expert panel, it was very important from the Macy Foundation's perspective that the individuals who were going to be working together to develop this tool, the composition of that group was interprofessional by nature and not by a short amount, pharmacy, nursing, medicine, but the Macy really gave us great guidance to ensure that in our selection process, we pulled in as large and as heterogeneous a group as possible. And we were thankfully able to do that with representation from 9 different professions or disciplines. Next slide. And so what we did within our expert panel was start by, first of all, defining what does high quality programmatic IPE even mean, because there were some conflicts within the literature. And this shown on your screen is the definition that the group came up with. IPE that is longitudinal, it's integrated into curricula spanning the entire length of a student's educational program. And what we set out to do after defining this, this topic was to generate consensus around what are the institutional characteristics that are either present or absent that would help or hinder an institution to achieve high quality programmatic IPE. We leveraged a modified Delphi technique in order to come to consensus, and we ultimately generated 105 expert consensus statements. Next slide. What you see pictured here is a breakdown of that expert consensus by category. The categories of interest that were most highly represented were culture, leadership, financing, infrastructure, partnerships, faculty and curricular affairs. And because we were building a tool that was specifically rooted in the IPEC competency framework, this group helped us figure out how best the IPEC competency framework could either help or hinder high quality programmatic IPE. And so you see that represented in large number on your slide. The pilot item generation was our next step in this process. So we took these 105 consensus statements and we tasked our expert panel with, we put them in pairs and asked them to study the consensus statements, generate pilot items for the tool that they thought could speak and capture this consensus. And so we did that through this process in pairs. Kelly and I served as sort of a screening group where we were consolidating, reconciling, rectifying disagreements or issues, and also coming up with a unified scale that would be able to capture the intent and the sentiment across all of our working groups. We generated through that process 48 pilot items. We generated operational definitions so that when we pilot tested these items, the individuals who were on the receiving end would have a uniform understanding of where we were going. We were thankfully able to recruit 158 designated IPE leaders. This is one individual representing IPE from their institution across the US who submitted responses to our pilot items. Next slide. And we were thankfully in that convenience sample, we were able to generate a very balanced and heterogeneous group, which will ultimately help and sort of speaks to the potential generalizability across at least our population here in the US. You see a really nice breakdown in public and private institutions, research and teaching institutions. And that was really a stroke of luck that is going to help us. Next slide. So we then leveraged exploratory factor analysis on the response patterns to our 48 pilot items and came up with a tool that was 20 items total across 3 subscales or factors focused on institutional infrastructure, commitment, and the best way to leverage the IPEC competency framework. Next slide. I'm not going to read through this to sort of jump ahead and sort of get to the punchline. We've already published this process, this study, this tool. You'll be able to find that through a QR code shortly. But I do want to highlight that on the importance of institutional infrastructure, at least from the expert panel in the US, highlighted and reinforced, and this came through in the exploratory factor analysis, the absolute importance of having a centralized coordinating structure for IPE that could handle finances, budgeting, faculty facilitator evaluations, and the like. And so the absolute critical importance of a coordinating structure capable of leading IPE on behalf of an entire institution came through, as well as institutional commitment. One of the things I like to highlight when we present this subscale is that long-term commitment, our operational definition, was a commitment that spanned 10 years or more. We know that was an aspirational goal. Many institutions plan out 5 years. Their strategic plans and visions, their financial models go out to 5 years. But we were essentially, this expert panel was highlighting that IPE cannot be short-term. It cannot exist on soft money, grant money. It needs to be hardwired into the institution from an infrastructure standpoint and from a financial standpoint. Next slide. And then, of course, we had this big expert consensus statements around the IPEC competency framework. And we knew, I'm a member of the core competencies revision group representing the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. And so Kelly and I knew from the get-go that the core competencies were in the revision process. So did the expert panel. And so we approached the consensus development and then ultimately the item development from that perspective, from how to leverage the IPEC core competencies on a more broad perspective, from like the 30,000-foot view, knowing that over time, this document itself, the specific sub-competencies would be revised. And so we're, important things to take away from this subscale were mapping to accreditation, leveraging these core competencies for measurement and assessment, and continuous quality improvement over time. Next slide. We're really excited to share the first national quantitative baseline in the US of this tool. So from the work that we've done, we now have sort of a national lens to say, using this tool, our peers across the country, this is how folks scored themselves. And so we've recommended that this tool be used for internal purposes primarily, but it's important to know how you stack up against your peers. That will influence conversations that happen inside the institution, whether that's for fighting for more resources or whatever it may be. But we're really pleased to sort of share this with you as well. So, and we encourage folks across the country in the US to use this tool and to compare themselves to the national baseline. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the title page of our paper that was published in September. There's a QR code in case you want to scan. And I know Tony mentioned that these slides will be shared with all attendees. So please read our paper, leverage our paper, and put it to use at your institutions as well, globally or in the US. Next slide. So just to wrap things up, we see real value not only in the tool, which has strong psychometric data behind it and its use, but we also see a lot of utility, potential utility for the 105 expert consensus statements that were generated. So that is included as an appendix in the publication, and we would encourage you and your colleagues to leverage both the tool and the consensus statements to improve IPE at your institutions. Next. Thank you.
Thanks,
Tony.
Joe. That's a great project, and it's a great resource for all of our programs. Next, we're going to turn it over to the core competencies revision process with Mark Spiker and Fran Velasquez.
Thanks, Tony, and welcome everybody. It's really nice to be here, and I look forward to talking with you and answering your questions today. I'm Mark Spiker. I'm Senior Vice President for Medical Education and Research at the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine, and I'm a member of the advisory committee on the core competencies revision, as well as the IPEC planning and advisory committee. Fran, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Fran Velasquez. I am Professor Emeritus at Niehoff School of Nursing and Stritch School of Medicine in Loyola, Chicago. And I'm also the co-director of the Institute for Transformative Interprofessional Education at Loyola. And I represent the National League for Nursing on the Core Competency Revision Working Group.
Thanks. Just to go through a little bit of the process and the history here of how we got to the current core competency revision. As Shelley mentioned, IPEC began the process of once again updating the core competencies. The 2016 update was focused on broadening the core competencies to better achieve at the time the triple aim, now the quintuple aim, with a particular focus on population health. If you have not seen these reports, they actually give a great background to the core competencies and the core competency revision. So I highly recommend you visit the IPEC website. They are free and they're available under the resources tab on the IPEC website. Next slide, Shelley. After 5 years from the most recent revision of the IPEC core competencies, the board felt that it was time to take an introspective look at the 2016 version. Many factors led to the decision to revise them, such as the need for interprofessional competency development in today's environment again, and especially in light of COVID, but also to engage the IPA and the collaborative practice communities around the effort at a higher level. Changing and making all health profession education more consistent can help set the stage for the health system of the future, and we want to start that process together. Next slide, Shelley. So this is obviously a screenshot of our website. We'll cover some of the key points of the revision effort, but you'll obviously find more details on the IPEC website, and I encourage you to visit the website, click under the resources tab on IPEC core competencies. You'll see a link to the 2021-2023 revision. The website's a great resource, and it also includes FAQs developed by some of the working group members. So it's sort of updated in real time. What's been really interesting and important about the current revision effort and how it's differed from the past two competency revisions is how inclusive the process has been. The Core Competencies Working Group comprises a panel of IPE and clinical practice leaders and experts from across the nation, representing 200 years of combined experience. There are a total of 23 members who represent all 21 of IPEC's member associations and include 2 active health profession students. Each IPEC member association used their own process for identifying their nominee to this group. Some associations had an open call for applications, others simply identified volunteers. The revision effort is overseen by the IPEC Executive Board of Directors. The 9-member board approves the priorities and the strategic direction of the process. Next is the advisory group, of which I'm honored to be a member. We serve as the planning and coordinating advisory body. To ensure synergy across IPEC's many initiatives, the 8 advisory group members of the revision process also serve on IPEC's planning and advisory committee overall. And finally, the working group is the main consensus panel responsible for reviewing evidence and generating suggested evidence. Together, the 23 working group members and 8 advisory group members provide recommendations and edits to the executive board who holds ultimate and final approval. So here you'll see the charge laid out to the working group and the advisory group by the executive board. Project members were asked to elicit feedback on the 2016 core competencies from both sides of the equation, both academic and practice. In reviewing this data and information, they were asked to consider what's being said in the current interprofessional literature. They've been also asked to ensure that the revisions are relevant to the IPE field and to the changing healthcare landscape. And they've been asked together to propose recommendations for modifications, external and internal review. As part of the process, the 23 working group members were divided into 4 work streams: gather feedback and experiences, research and literature review, competency revisioning, and report writing and editing. To complete specific tasks, each work stream was co-led by 2 advisory group members. And you can see this is sort of our timeline for what's been happening so far. The groups have been hard at work since July 2021. To begin with, a member stakeholder survey was administered to determine IPEC members' thoughts and attitudes towards the use of the 2016 core competencies. A total of 82 IPEC institutional members and users of the core competencies responded to the survey. The IPEC also held 2 open town halls, which were attended by almost 300 people. One was a standalone event sponsored by IPEC, and the second one was held as a special session at the 2021 Virtual Nexus Summit. After these 2 events, working group members responded to an emerging themes survey. Then the working groups completed a modified Delphi survey on the 2016 version of the core competencies. In August of this year, IPEC Associate Executive Director Shelley McKerney presented at the Nexus Summit an update on the competency revision. After that, the results of the modified Delphi survey and public feedback were once again reviewed and discussed among the working group, and the competency revisioning workstream used these comments and processes to propose a new set of competencies. The competencies, importantly, are accompanied by a glossary of terms and definitions that were developed by the report writing and editing workstream. Using these items, another modified Delphi survey went out on the proposed revisions in October. Fran is going to discuss with you some of the specific proposed changes.
Thank you, Mark. Just for the record, I participated in the competency revision workstream. I'm sure you're all wondering what are some examples of proposed revisions. Again, the competency revisioning workstream drafted an initial slate of revised subcompetencies. That proposed slate went into the first round of modified Delphi survey and is currently being reviewed by an internal first reactor pool. While it's a bit premature to share these revisions with you today, some broad examples include combining a subcompetency with another subcompetency within the same domain. For instance, merging 2 values and ethics subcompetencies together, or even combining a subcompetency with a subcompetency from a different domain. So perhaps integrating a subcompetency from values and ethics into, say, something on teamwork or communication. Next slide. Basically, the concepts where you'll see, I think, some of the changes more clearly is, here are a couple of the key constructs that we heard in those surveys and town halls. These concepts reflect what has been incorporated into the revisions. Although we're unable to share some red line changes with you today, I hope you'll just take our word for it. You will see it sooner than you think. Constructs just as DEI, interprofessional leadership, the concept of One Health, the importance of well-being and resilience, and the practice of team science. These are all important concepts that have been infused into the draft revisions. So who is the learner target audience? This has been a source of conversation for many of us. Another pending change that you'll see in the 2023 report was embedded into the preamble for this work. While we acknowledge that there are many different uses of core competencies in many different settings, we'd like to stress that the upcoming 2023 competency set is aimed at preparing students. As stated earlier, interprofessional work must occur both at the academic and practice level. However, much of IPEC's work is done through its members at academic institutions. Therefore, the target audience for the IPEC core competencies is the health professions student. His focus on the student is actually quite different from IPEC's previous competency sets. The 2011 and 2016 reports had a narrower audience of pre-licensure or pre-credentialed student, but those reports were also conducted when IPEC was still only a 6-member organization. As Shelley mentioned, IPEC has grown significantly since then, and this consensus building effort reflects that expansion. To be as inclusive, forward-looking, and realistic, the choice was made to open up the framework to all students, regardless of level or pathway to licensure or credentialing, and regardless of discipline. Next slide. Mark, is this a repeat of what you already did? Oh, this is,
This
yeah,
is
sorry.
this is what we have left to go. I'm happy to.
Yep.
Okay, Mark, you want to take this one on?
Sure. So this is our roadmap of today and forward into the future. So there's more work to be done. We plan on having at least one more modified Delphi survey round next year. Just for those of you who aren't too familiar with Delphi surveys, the way that you tell when you're done with the Delphi process is that there's no real meaningful differences in the changes that you receive based on your expert panel. But what's most important to note is that in the spring, we'll be gathering additional feedback, including feedback from you. As I mentioned, we'll be hosting open town halls and reaching out to certain stakeholders and groups, and we want you to provide your thoughts on the draft. In the spring, representatives from the working and advisory groups will be spreading the word about the new core competencies at association and partner meetings and through our website. So this is actually our second meeting on the revision, and on behalf of both groups, we'd like to thank again IP Global, and we will make sure that IP Global gets the red line revisions when they're ready for general comments, but especially thank them for organizing this special session today. Just
Mark, can you real quick, can you explain the reactor panel? I'm not sure everyone understands the composition of those reactor panels.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was just checking to see if I was unmuted. Yeah, thanks. The initial reactor panel is an internal reactor panel made up of individuals who were interested or nominated for being on the working group, but we limited the size of the working group and we formed the additional volunteers or nominees into what we called the internal reactor panel. So this is a new set of eyes that's taking a look at the redlined revisions and providing feedback on those revisions. And just to, before I turn it over to Shelley to manage the questions on our session, just a reminder of how you can find out more about what's going on with the core competency revision, or send an email to a working group or an advisory group member. And we do want your comments and questions. If you're, we're looking for questions to add to our frequently asked questions list, which you'll find on the website, but please do go to the website and provide us with your comments, your questions, your feedback. As you can see, you can access a feedback form on the website, or you can send us an email. So please, we do look forward to your comments and to your questions. I'm going to check the chat real quick for questions, but Shelley, I think we're ready for the Q&A session.
Yeah, I think, oh, I'm sorry, Shelley.
Sorry, I just wanted to note again that we really recommend joining the IPEC website, specifically the IPEC Connect community. The website is, again, really the best way to receive updates, but as Mark mentioned, we'll absolutely share this information with our colleagues at IP Global.
So I'm going to start kind of asking some of the questions here. So I think there's a couple questions regarding the involvement of veterinary medicine and the inclusion of One Health in the competencies. I'm not sure who wants to take that question, maybe Mark or Fran, possibly.
I can certainly respond to that question. Yes, veterinary medicine has been included in both the Delphi surveys and in the membership in the working and revision group. And we have, I can't remember exactly where the red line ended up with One Health, but there certainly have been discussions of including One Health in the competencies. I don't remember where exactly, as I said, but you'll also find it in our glossary.
Yeah, and veterinary is a member of IPEC, so yeah, they're part of the association. So, also, another question is, would the town hall meetings include a virtual options for people, so they can be inclusive of anyone who'd like to attend?
Yes, all of our past town halls have included a virtual option. And Shelley, I don't think that we're planning any in-person only town halls. I think that we're planning a number of virtual town halls in the future.
That's right, Mark.
The next question is, there's a question regarding about the integration of team science and how that interfaces with the teamwork aspect of the prior core competencies.
This is Fran. I can speak to that. It is actually integrated, so that the addition is not, we did not discard the team and teamwork competency, but we enhanced it by using current evidence from team science.
Good. Here's a question for Joe Zorek. When utilizing the institutional assessment instrument, is it best to have one individual complete the survey or multiple within an institution?
That's a really good question. So when we built the tool, we had envisioned the primary individual at an institution who was responsible for IPE at that institution. We called that individual the designated IPE leader. That said, it's very unlikely that one individual will have all of the answers to all of the questions. And so when we were piloting the pilot items and developing the database to run the analyses, we had encouraged folks, if they didn't have the answers, to seek the answers institutionally. So it's essentially one individual representing the institution. And so including other stakeholders, I've used the tool myself at my institution, the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio, with one of our what would be similar to like a steering committee within our centralized IPE coordinating structure. And so getting the input from other stakeholders, it would be important, but ultimately the determination is up on where an institution would rate on any given item would be up to the designated IPE leader.
There's a question regarding the availability of the glossary on the website. That I do not believe that's posted yet. Correct? Shelley?
Yes, not yet, Tony. It will, once the core competencies are ready for prime time, it will be accompanied by that glossary set.
So just as a reminder, the glossary is a new development and we consider it a component of the core competency revision. So we're treating it as part of the core competency revision document. So the whole document will be posted. Good.
So a couple of the areas that are new in this revision process are in the areas of DEI and leadership. I think there's been quite a bit of feedback we've received through this process regarding those two areas. Can you speak to kind of where the trends are as far as DEI and the leadership components in the core competencies revision?
I think probably the couple of us might want to respond to this. I think in terms of DEI, and I can comment on more of it as an integration and a core value throughout the competencies. We did not develop a competency specifically around DEI, but tried to integrate it more into the competency, the sub-competencies, I think I should add. In terms of leadership, Anthony, could you repeat that question in relation to leadership?
Yeah,
Part
I
of the
mean,
question?
I think one of the thematic areas that have been identified in the revision is in the area of leadership within the 4 competencies. Can you talk a little bit about kind of where they may be emerging in the sub-competencies?
Okay, so I think obviously leadership is in the team and teamwork competency and probably referred to in roles as well. We use the concept of leadership as a shared concept and a function of every team member, that every team member, based on the situation they're being confronted, every team based on the situation they're confronted with, would utilize a leader, or a leader would emerge as the person most knowledgeable about that problem or patient situation that they were being confronted with. So the concept of leadership is integrated as a leadership style that's flowing and that is shared within the team. I hope that's helpful.
No, and I think that ties well into one of the questions regarding DEI also, because it, you know, I think it, and with regards to not a new competency, but rather
Correct.
kind of a thematic element that
Correct.
spreads through all of our competencies.
Exactly.
I just wanted to add, Tony, that a lot of the feedback we also heard from those town halls was a request to kind of pare down the number of sub-competencies. So the working group was very, very deliberate and considerate of that. You know, we didn't want to add anything that seemed unnecessary, or, you know, that we didn't want to add to the total number. So we tried our best, as Fran said, to integrate these concepts into the existing 4 domains.
Yeah, we do have another question on the use of the word student versus learner in the language used in the competencies. Can you discuss where we're at with that right now?
That was also a hot topic of debate, I will say, student versus learner. You know, the concept of everyone is kind of a lifelong learner versus the student, but I think Fran covered it really well in her presentation, where we really wanted to focus, again, one, we wanted to not be as narrow as the 2011 and 2016 versions on the pre-credentialed student, but again, since IPEC is an association where all of our members are, you know, most of our members are academic institutions, that health profession student, that student is the end target, as well as, you know, the patient or individual receiving care. So we were very thoughtful, and we landed on student as being that encompassing term.
Well, I would say if we talk about the delivery process, I know we talked about it in the timeline, is, you know, I think there's 2 important mileposts, is when we're going to get kind of the draft, what kind of target dates for the draft, and then maybe the final version of the revisions.
Yes, we're hoping to, again, share some of the proposed changes in early next spring, and hoping to share maybe even a version in, I would say, spring, early summer. The tentative launch date is somewhere between the summer and fall. So as soon as we have those dates a little more set in stone, we will absolutely put that information on the IPEC website and share it with our members and our partners as well.
There is a question regarding the institutional assessment instrument. Are they looking at different entities outside of academic training sites or schools?
Good question. So similar to the focus on students for the revision process, the core competency revision process, we were focused on academic institutions for the same reasons about sort of composition of IPEC constituents and that kind of thing. So there are no, at this current time, there are no plans underway to adapt the tool for a different environment. But what I would direct you to is a group called NCycle, the National Collaborative for Improving Clinical Learning Environments, I believe. I know that NCycle, we co-presented with them at the National Center for Interprofessional Practice and Education's annual meeting this year. They are a group that has broader representation beyond academic institutions. And I know that they have a working group that's working on a similar measurement instrument that's more targeted towards clinical learning environments. And so if you're interested in that, and I think that question came from Todd James, Todd, shoot me an email. We could connect on that offline, and I'd be happy to connect you with my contacts who I know are working on that with NCycle.
There is a question regarding how will this new competency framework work within that the continuing education spectrum, with kind of that reverse megaphone model, and the regarding foundational, grad ed, and continuing education. How will these new language and the new competencies fit within that?
So this is Mark Spiker. We've had many discussions about where are we aiming this at students? Are we aiming it at everyone? And while our target audience is students, and you will see some language in the competencies that is clearly geared towards students and a student-based learning environment, it will not be a far stretch to apply these to practice environments, because collaborative practice is part of the mission of IPEC. And so, our practice environments generally include students, and our expertise is for students, but they will be able to be adapted to other learning environments. So continuing education learners, other kinds of learners.
Okay. Can we advance the slides, Shelley, real quick before we wrap up? Once again, this is the social media tags and the website for IPEC. And if you want more information, we also shared the link for the core competencies revision in the chat. And actually, I'll do that one more time. There we go. So it's in the chat. Also, I want to remind you to join our next cafe. We will be sending out the Venerable John Gilbert will be presenting, looking at the WHO collaborative practice framework, and on the 12th of January. So there'll be an announcement going out about that. And everyone that registered for this will be on the list for the future announcements. So you will be hearing about those also. We have those every month. So any other questions that anyone has before we wrap up? On behalf of Interprofessional.global, I would like to formally thank our guests from IPEC and all of you that have attended. This is a tremendous milestone, and we appreciate the generosity of your time, your information, and the work you've done moving forward on this.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday season, everyone. Thank you.